I've had a kind of unusual, twisty path. I've been investing now for over 35 years. And what's kept me engaged in this creative profession for so long is really the three questions that you see here. You constantly get to come back to ask, in this new world, changing every day, what is newly visible? What is newly valuable? What is newly possible? So I'm going to take that couple decades of experience and try to condense them. You just saw the three questions that animate my work. I'll talk today about three solutions and one story to try to tie it all together. First, I think it's important to recognize that investing is a pretty tangled bank. It's a very crowded, complicated, and complex landscape with lots of different forms of finance, lots of jargon that we've created. Just like every profession, we've got our own secret language. It's not always the most friendly place to visit. Just in my corner of the investment world, the sustainable investment world, we have sustainable investing, impact investing, responsible investing, exclusionary investing, mission-related investing. It goes on and on and on. Lots and lots of different forms. And there's great news here. This part of the investment world has developed really quickly. Assets that are pretty seriously addressing sustainability issues are up to about 1.5 trillion worldwide. That's more than doubled in the last 5 or 6 years. But any farmer will tell you the activity up on top of the surface is just one part of the story. If you really want to understand what's happening in a system, you have to get below the surface and look a little bit more at the roots. Look at the soil health. Look if there's something changing in that root layer that could enable what you really hope to see manifest up above. So I'm going to try today to get under the roots of finance, to go to the parts that are harder to see if you're not actively engaged in the practice yourself. We'll talk about three key solutions. And the first one is this main equation. It's the net present value equation. If you had to pick one equation to rule all of finance, this might indeed be it. What this equation explains is that there really are only three things that matter for the value of any investment: time, risk, and return. And so the inputs that we have into this into this equation are really important. And they've changed pretty dramatically over the last 10 to 15 years. We've had the establishment of a whole set of standards that aim to identify what sustainability issues are important for individual companies depending on their specific business type. So thanks to organizations like the SASB organization, we now have sustainability data on about 3/4 of the global S&P 1200 companies. That might sound really wonky, but let me tell you, if you're trying to cook with the ingredients we have in finance, the idea that we have all of these ingredients now on the shelf to work with in terms of our inputs is a really, really big deal. And let me tell you what that means in practice. If you see a company that you know is going to be more and more impacted by extreme weather events, that goes right up there in risk. If you see a company that's treating their employees well and allowing them to stay employed longer and do better, more engaged work, that goes right up there in return. And if you know that that sustainable agriculture and regenerative activity leads to increasing returns after a few years, that goes right there in time. So what this means is we have a whole host of issues that used to falsely be called externalities that now have been brought right here into the heart of the financial process, into this main calculation of value. It is a big freaking deal, even though I know it sounds kind of wonky. And importantly, this equation is everyone's job in finance. It is not just the job of the people who happen to have sustainability on their business card. So this is a really important shift down at this root layer, and it's well underway. The second solution is our ability to map whole systems, and this is where I've learned so much from my affiliation with the Santa Fe Institute and its researchers over the years. I tend to think of whole systems, and particularly complex adaptive systems, as the really fun, important systems in our world. Things like societies, ecosystems, markets, cities. These are all systems that you can't just cookie-cutter model out. You have to think about the interactions and how the different components change and evolve over time. What we found in investing over time is that so often you have a fantastic idea at the front end of the process, an invention that's really worth investing in. And then, as you've heard a couple examples of throughout the day today, sometimes those inventions don't actually get deployed out in the world in the way that they optimally would. If we have these whole systems maps, we can think about better questions earlier in the process. So one example I would cite here that's really vivid in today's discussion is the conversation around data center build-out. If you were having those conversations 20 years ago, and we were, almost all the conversation would be focused on what's happening inside of those data centers, and that's the end of the discussion. Now, we're still talking about all those really important engineering questions, but we're also talking about how those centers are going to be powered, both in the short term and the long term, how that links to overall community presence and the health of the broader power generation system, how all that then links out to ecosystem services and really thinking about disruption in the broader setting. This is a big deal. Now, there aren't always tidy answers to all those questions, but the fact that they're being asked at the front end of the process and not 20 years later, once problems have already emerged, is really, really important. Let's talk about this third issue, which is measuring what matters. It's interesting to me that this is the most perennial question that comes up. I think it's probably the longest question in terms of the length of time that we've been focused on it, not just in finance, but in all of our different systems. And yet I would say this is the one where we have the farthest to go. This question of measuring what matters has a few different dimensions that are really important. First, you have to actually know what matters. And then you have to think about what are the metrics that really fit. A great example here is the amazing, amazing work of all the different organizations that just brought the methane sat into orbit. I don't know how many of you have been following this, but if you think about the importance of methane, we've known it matters for a really long time, roughly 80 times more intense than CO2 in its early lifespan, and lots of incentives to actually cap methane emissions without necessarily the progress that we would have hoped to see. Why is this? Because the information wasn't exactly what we needed. As an investor, what I could look to on methane emissions up until just a few months ago was usually fragmented information, not totally accurate, 6 or 9 months in arrears, very hard to access. What can you do with information like that, even if it does have to do with a really vital issue? Not that much. But now, this amazing satellite, you can get real-time information, fully accurate, highly granular, totally accessible. Right, I can get it on my phone. It's incredible. And so this is information that is not just more information, but it's better information. We cannot report our way into greatness, but if we get the information that's really valuable in an actionable way, we can go ahead and do amazing things with it. So we've had some great progress in measuring what matters, but again, there's a really long way to go here. I would note there's a layer beyond measuring what matters that I think is really important to acknowledge. We've talked a lot about the value of nature. We've talked a lot about the value of ecosystem services. These are vital, vital conversations. But I do worry that when we put a price tag on things, we tend to think they can all be bought and sold. There are some things in the world that go beyond price. There are some things that do not benefit from being translated into economic terms. I find myself sometimes in conversations and we're talking about things like royalties when maybe we would benefit more from talking about respect or maybe even reverence. And so again, noting which things belong in which category I think is a really important piece of the puzzle here, and it's an area where we could be more courageous if we choose. Finally, I hope you will allow me a little editorial on my deep, deep, passionate antipathy towards pie charts. I hate pie charts. Let me tell you why. Pie charts are flat and they are fixed. They are the exact opposite of all the exciting, alive issues that we've been talking about here. And particularly, I'll give you an example. In our field of sustainable investing, I can't tell you how many times we've been asked, could you give me a pie chart that shows the environmental, social, and governance concerns that you embed into your investment process? As if there's some kind of perfect proportion of these falsely separated categories that is going to give you this magical recipe that will illustrate that you somehow have a good process or it's going to result automatically in easy and wonderful outcomes. This is an example of such an important topic and such a terrible question. So I urge all of us to think about what really belongs in this pie chart format and what doesn't. The most pernicious thing of all about this fixed, flat kind of representation of some of our most vital issues is that it is finite. It is inherently zero-sum in nature. In a pie chart world, for me to win, someone else has to lose. But we all know that the best investments, really the best things in all of life, don't look like a fixed pie at all. The best things in life are when we create something that is needed and valuable and wasn't here before. It doesn't fit on this chart at all. And in that kind of world, for me to win, you have to win too. So it's not just a matter of choosing something else from the drop-down menu when we do graphics. This is a really deep root that I think needs to be rethought in a lot of our different settings. The tools that we use matter. The way that we employ data matters. It's not just a question of filling out all the checklists and filling all the boxes on the compliance forms. There's deeper questions here. Now, I mentioned these questions at the beginning that captivate me. What is newly visible? What is newly valuable? And what is newly possible? There's one question that's not here, even though it's implied, and that is, what is newly needed? I've been thinking about this a lot these days, and really over the whole course of my life. And it brings me to the story I'd like to close with. A couple years ago, I was in New York running from meeting to meeting, and I have to admit, it was an uphill feeling kind of day. Things weren't going that great. I turned the corner, and I ran smack into this giant steel sculpture that said, "Hope." I've always loved this passage that Václav Havel says, where he's distinguishing between hope and optimism, and he argues they are not at all the same thing. Hope is not a blithe belief that everything's going to turn out okay in the end. Hope is something stronger than that. It is a certainty that something is worth working toward, no matter how it turns out. And so, having that distinction in mind, I took this quick picture, ran on my way to my next meeting, and it wasn't until a lot later that I saw these two little hands at the bottom of the sculpture, someone who was cleaning the sculpture. And it occurs to me that for all of us, whether we're working deep in the roots of our different professional settings, or we're inventing the amazing things up above on the surface that are going to change our world, or we're tending to those priceless networks that hold the entire thing together, this might be the job description for all of us at this point in time, to wake up in the morning and roll up our sleeves and polish up the hope. Thank you.